Welcome. So in this video, I'm going to break down buy, borrow, die, the real estate version. So we have all been told by our parents, the best thing you can do is buy a property, buy a house, rent it out, build a property portfolio, and this is the key to wealth. Now this video is something that's quite close to home because my family, my parents are heavily invested in property developers and they've been involved in residential and commercial. So it is a very, very close to home video. But this video really is quite brutal because it does shatter the illusion of property investing. Now, why do I have a picture of Charlie Munger on the screen? Well, he left behind some fantastic wisdom and it really applies to what I'm going to talk about. He says, if we avoid bad investments, this is more important than listening to a CPA. So, good Charlie saying that. So why is that even relevant? Well, when everyone on YouTube, all the CPAs that talk about the buy, borrow, die strategy, they all say the same thing. Do you know what the billionaires do? They take out loans instead of selling assets because a loan isn't income. And yes, we all know that. But what they fail to miss out is, oh, by the way, if you do this on a bad investment, you're actually just liquidating yourself faster. That is why it is so relevant and it's so important to be a good capital allocator first than to even do the strategy. And that is what is the most important part of it. We must be more focused on avoiding bad investments. That is the most important part. Otherwise, the strategy is null and void. So we're going to break down a residential real estate property, and this one is just a non-prime location. The brutal truth is 95% of properties fail to truly generate wealth above inflation. And this spreadsheet is going to feel like a sledgehammer straight to the middle class capital allocators who believe that real estate is the key to wealth. The reality is all the boomers who invested in property in prime locations when it was cheap, you know, Manhattan and London, central London, locations that you cannot create any more land on, and they vastly outperformed inflation. They made true wealth from it. Obviously, they're going to tell their children, yeah, buy property. This is how you do it. But it's just not as straightforward as that. I truly believe a lot of these boomers who profited so vastly from property is they don't even know why it happened or how it happened. It just fell into their hands. But for the majority of people, investing in property is just, and if it's not prime, the spreadsheet is going to speak for itself. So let's look at it. Okay, so this is just a typical standard non-prime residential. $1 million purchase price, 20% deposit, down payment, so that's 200 grand plus the fees, you know, your solicitor fees, your closing costs, all the costs involved in actually getting the purchase through. So we're taking a mortgage of 800 grand here and we're going to rent this out. So we've got 5 years of rental income, let's say 350k. Mortgage cost 287, property taxes 1.5, maintenance, CapEx, insurance. So the net cash flow it's negative. Okay, so negative 60k. And this is something because of the capital expenditure. This is something that people just flat out ignore, the laws of physics. Because our parents all taught us that property just goes up, it's created this illusion that if you really think about it, if we all held a property and we did not touch it for 100 years, the property would likely go back to the dirt. The roof would be destroyed, the boiler would break, the bricks would deteriorate. Entropy destroys the property. This is just the law of physics. But for some reason, we're thinking of something that is a victim to the law of physics, and we're saying that goes up in value. And it doesn't really make sense to me when I thought about it like that. So the law of physics doesn't work on our schedule. So when the boiler's going to break or the roof's going to break or something's going to break, it doesn't happen on our schedule. It doesn't happen linearly. It can either happen all at once and just wipe out 2 years of profit, or it can just happen randomly. But we have to maintain the property to keep it alive. So the annual appreciation is 5%. Property value grows to 1.2. So our gross equity comes to 531k. Now, this is the hard part. This is when we go to sell the property, it really just gets ripped apart. Now, you will notice that right now it has actually got a nominal profit. Okay, so we have actually outperformed the money supply here. The only reason though was because of the debt. So if we actually bought the property cash, we would have lost purchasing power here. This is important. This is very important. When you start to see these numbers, you think to yourself, people that are actually aggressively overpaying their mortgage are actually just bailing the bank out of inflation. They've actually just saved the bank. The strongest part of real estate is the fact that you can get long-term fixed cheap debt. To pay that off aggressively is just incinerating wealth. The real problem comes here on the liquidity event after we pay the taxes. So the estate agent taking 5 to 6%, depreciation, recapture, capital gains tax. So in actual fact, our nominal return is now only 32% from our original investment. And after we account for money supply expansion, we are at minus 3%. It is painful. The numbers are painful. So where did I get the 303 from? So the gross equity was 531. Of course, the estate agent fees, IRS, capital gains, operation cash bleed that we spent over the 5 years. So it's negative 3. It is negative 3 on this occasion. It's just, so essentially you've worked for 5 years. We took on 800k of debt, fixed toilets, paid the IRS, and the wealth has grown slower than the rate of inflation. So we successfully acted as a highly taxed, unpaid property manager for the banking system. It is painful. It is very painful. It gets worse though, because property investors almost never account for their own biological labour. They just don't even account their own work that they put into it. So if they go to the property and fix things and deal with tenants, deal with contractors, phoning up companies, doing administration, doing tax returns, do we account for that? Well, if you valued your time at $200 an hour and you worked 5 hours a week on average on the property over the course of a year, that's 260 grand. But of course, most property investors always say, well, my labour's free. For some reason, and this is the same for business owners. A lot of business owners, they just don't value their own time, their own hours. Because if you hired someone else to manage the property and you paid them to make it a true investment, it just incinerates all of the capital. All of the wealth is just destroyed. So this is painful. This spreadsheet is painful, and it really shatters the illusion. What if it's a prime location? If it's a prime location, it's a whole different game. If you're central Manhattan, Miami Beach, Monaco, you buy the property for 10 million. It costs a fortune to keep it alive, but it appreciates so fast. Your actual yield is 234%. Yeah. And that's with no even rental at all. So you wouldn't rent this type of property. You wouldn't want to rent something that expensive, because even if you're renting it for like 80 to 100k a month, you're still becoming basically a luxury resort manager. Because the people that rent these properties don't view themselves as tenants, they view themselves as staying at a 5-star hotel. What about commercial? So commercial's interesting. Commercial actually did outperform. Because the genius part of commercial is all the cost of entropy is passed on to the tenant. So the tenant takes on all the maintenance, all the insurance, all the property taxes, and we just paid the mortgage. So the commercial property actually did generate slightly more than the residential. I believe after tax the yield was about 20%. So it's still not ideal though. It's still not ideal because if you compare it to the S&P 500, it's still not. I mean, you don't have any volatility. Okay, you can't get margin called on a commercial property. You have zero volatility to the market and things. So there is benefits to it. Okay, so you're dealing with commercial tenants. You're still managing physical property for half a decade, navigating IRS broker fees. You did beat the money printer by 20%, so 4% a year. So there isn't a lot of margin of error. A single bad event does wipe out the victory. If a tenant defaults as well, it could take 6 months to lease the space. Cash flow drops. If you were to replace commercial HVAC unit, easily 25k. So it's still not without zero risk. Especially if you're buying something at like $1 million commercial, like we don't know what that location is. Is it what the business is? Is it like in a mall, or is it an office? Is the business got stability? So it's not without its risk, but neither is any investment. So what is the actual solution? What is the solution to this? Well, the solution is to focus on a strong investment first. The apex investments of the world that have true pricing power, that actually soak up all the liquidity like a sponge. Yeah, these are companies in the world that we can invest in, even if it's at least the S&P 500. We don't borrow against the S&P 500, but at least you are protecting your wealth rather than making bad investments, which is far more catastrophic. Yeah. For me personally, I'm investing in companies with a strong pricing power. I like B2B businesses, huge monopolies, biggest companies in the world. That is what I'm focused on. But that's it. That is how we do it. We avoid bad investments. So this is why we stop listening to a CPA tell us just take out debt against a bad asset. If they can't measure the asset first, run it through a real spreadsheet and really know exactly what we're investing in. And listen to the GOAT, good old Charlie.